Have you ever imagined what a medieval battle really looked like? Most people picture shining knights charging valiantly, swords flashing under the sun, and a clear victory for the heroes. But the reality was far, far from this romanticized image. Medieval battles were chaotic, brutal, and terrifying affairs. Muddy fields soaked in blood, men screaming in pain, and sheer panic gripping armies. Glory was rare. Survival was everything. Today, let's dive deep into what actually happened on those brutal battlefields, what the knights and soldiers really experienced, what their fears were, and how these violent clashes shaped history. Long before the clashing swords and flying arrows, the soldiers faced grueling preparation. Unlike modern armies, medieval soldiers were rarely professional warriors. Most were peasants, farmers, or tradesmen drafted by their lords. Training? Minimal at best. Imagine being a farmer, suddenly told to take up a sword or a spear and fight in a battle you barely understand. Many had never held a weapon properly before that day. Before battle even began, most soldiers were already exhausted. They marched for hours, sometimes days, carrying weapons, supplies, and armor that could weigh over 30 kilograms. Fatigue was the first enemy they had to face. Unlike modern professional armies, most medieval soldiers were not trained fighters. They were farmers, blacksmiths, and craftsmen, called upon by their lords. Their weapons were often old, poorly made, or simply tools turned into arms. Armor was difficult to put on and even harder to move in. Chainmail scratched the skin, helmets limited vision and hearing, and the weight made running nearly impossible. It wasn't heroic. It was painful and suffocating. Many soldiers spent the hours before battle silently praying, sharpening their weapons, or simply staring into the distance, trying to stay calm. The tension hung heavy in the air. Every clang of metal, every rustle of armor echoed like thunder. There was no grand speech, no heroic rallying cry, just the grim silence of men waiting for fate. Side by side, they stood not as fearless warriors, but as humans, scared, tired, and unsure if they'd ever see their families again. And then, suddenly, it began. A horn blasted in the distance. Orders were shouted, feet stomped, hearts pounded. The once silent soldiers surged forward like a wave, rushing toward the enemy with a mixture of fear and fury. Battle wasn't a neat dance of swordplay like in the movies. It was chaos. Men slipped in mud, tripped over bodies, swung wildly in panic. The air was filled with screams, metal clashing, and the stink of blood and sweat. Visibility was poor. Helmets narrowed vision. Dust and fog clouded the air, and soldiers often couldn't see more than a few steps ahead. Many didn't even know who they were hitting, friend or foe. Falling was often fatal. If you slipped, you might be trampled, stabbed, or crushed. There were no second chances. The battlefield was not a place for mistakes. It was a place where hesitation meant death. And yet, amidst the chaos, some tried to stay together. Soldiers shouted for comrades, formed tight circles, and fought back to back. In those moments, brotherhood was all they had. Swords were expensive and rare. Most soldiers fought with spears, axes, or even farming tools. Spears were cheap, easy to use, and deadly when used in formation. Sword fights were the exception, not the norm. Shields were lifesavers. Large wooden shields, often painted with crude symbols, were used not only to block attacks, but to push enemies back. In tight ranks, shields became walls of survival. Archers weren't just background support. A rain of arrows could break enemy morale and cause chaos before swords were even drawn. But archers were also vulnerable and often targeted first. Cavalry, armored knights on horseback, were powerful but rare. Most knights in movies are exaggerations. Horses were expensive, and many battles were fought entirely on foot. Strategy mattered more than strength. A well-timed flank or surprise ambush could win a battle. Commanders yelled orders, waved flags, and used horns to signal movements across the field. When the battle ended, the field was unrecognizable. Mud soaked with blood, broken weapons scattered everywhere, and bodies, friend and foe alike, lay where they had fallen. The silence after the chaos was deafening. Victory didn't feel like glory. Survivors limped through the carnage, searching for friends, finishing off the wounded, or scavenging anything useful. There were no cheers, only pain, exhaustion, and disbelief. The wounded cried out for help. Some were left behind. There were no medics, no stretchers, just crude bandages and prayers. Infection was often more deadly than the wounds themselves. For many, the worst part came after the battle, burying the dead, burning the fallen, or watching birds circle above. The smell lingered for days, and so did the nightmares. Why did they fight? Some were forced to. Lords demanded it. Others believed in honor, duty, or religion. Many fought for survival, for food, for coin, or to protect their homes. Not all were brave. Most were simply trapped. To many, the battlefield was just another kind of labor, a brutal job with high risk and low reward. For peasants, it wasn't glory they chased, it was a sack of grain or a silver coin at the end of it. They were not heroes, they were not legends. They were ordinary people, caught in something bigger than themselves, fighting not for pride, but because they had no choice. Medieval battles weren't like the movies. They were messy, brutal, and deeply human. There were no heroes, only survivors, and even they carried the scars for the rest of their lives. Understanding what truly happened in medieval warfare helps us see history differently. It's not just about kings and conquests, but about the countless forgotten lives caught in between. So next time you watch a sword fight on screen, remember, it wasn't elegant or noble. It was survival. It was chaos. And behind every blade was a person just trying to live another day.